This weekend, I had the opportunity to show my kids the movie Secondhand Lions. And that movie is great. I don't know if you've ever seen it before. And it was one of those movies where my kids were just rapt the whole time. I did not think they would be. I knew they would like this part of the movie where there's storytelling, where there's sort of sword fighting happening, and they're going. I knew they were going to like that part, so I did the whole just bear with it, guys. It's going to be good. Just watch it. I know you're not going to want it. The beginning is not going to seem great to you, but I want you to watch it. And they just loved every part of it. It was awesome. And so you should watch it with your family or just watch it by yourself if you have some time. Now, Secondhand Lions is about a boy named Walter who gets dropped off at some elderly uncle's house in the country in Texas so his mom can go have some fun. She's telling him, I'm going to school, I'm going to have a job, but really she's just having fun in Las Vegas and she's being a wayward woman. And Walter discovers throughout his life that his mom just lies and lies and lies and is never going to take things seriously. And now he's stuck here in Texas with these uncles and he's bored. He's miserable. No one wants him. No one wants him anywhere. And as the story goes along, as he begins to grow in a relationship with these older men, he begins to realize that these guys had lives of adventure when they were younger. They'd fought in wars. They'd journeyed throughout Europe and Africa, and they'd had great adventures, and they'd done amazing things, and they had amazing lives, and they'd won fortunes, and they did all kinds of things. And he's just enamored with who these men once were, and now they're just kind of old, living in Texas. And Uncle Hub, the more adventurous of the two uncles, begins to wonder as his age goes in up and up and up if there's even a purpose for him on earth anymore. What's he even doing here anymore? Every year I'm getting weaker and weaker and weaker. And he eventually says, what day is coming where I'm just going to be useless? And Walter sees off in the distance, he's talking to these high school boys, and he asks his Uncle Garth, he says, what's he telling them? He goes, he's giving them the what every boy needs to know about being a man speech. A lot of kids heard that speech over the years. And Walter eventually corners his uncle in the movie. He goes, I need to hear the speech. He goes, you're not old enough to hear the speech. Well, you have to be around long enough for me to hear the speech. And eventually he kind of wears these guys down enough to where they realize they have plenty of meaning left. They have plenty of life left to live, plenty of reason to be there and exist. It just looks different than it did when they were in their 20s. Now their purpose, now their adventure involves getting this kid raised and to become a man and go off into his way. And what they're aiming for, these uncles, are figuring out how they can live their lives without giving up before it's over. Or as Uncle Hub calls it, how can I die with my boots on? How can you die with your boots on? So we are finishing our series in Nehemiah this week, and we are looking at a single verse at the very end of it. And one of the things that we've done with this is we've been trying to do this vision series. And when I say we're doing a vision series every January or February, whenever these things pop up, I don't mean here are the activities that I hope we will do this year in 2025. What I really mean when I say vision series is what is the tone we want to set for ourselves as a church? This is the tone I want to set for us as a body of believers this year as we move forward. And the tone we're trying to set for ourselves this year is this. How can we find our spot in God's story? How can we find our spot in God's story? And Nehemiah is a man who, he's a man who found his spot in God's story. And he came and he did what God called him to do. And in chapter 13, the very last verse, we find Nehemiah doing something we saw him do 1,000 times in the book. We see him praying. Now, Nehemiah just spent time praying all throughout the book. Every time something came up, he would say a prayer to God and he'd go, and now he's at the very end of it, and he prays this prayer, remember me, oh my God, for good. I've lived my life. I've done what you've called me to do. I've worked to do and not give up on the calling you put on my life. I've lived out the vision. I've achieved the vision you put on my heart. And now remember me, God, that hopefully I will maybe die with my boots on. Remember me. This is the prayer at the heart of every Christian, by the way. Every Christian wants to know the answer to this question. Am I living truly the life God gave for me? Am I going to get to the end of my life and God's going to remember me for the good I did? Or will He go, man, there was so much more there for you? Every Christian wants to get to the end of their lives and hear those wonderful words. Well done, good and faithful servant. Now come on in and enjoy the pleasure of your Father. See, this is what we want to know. And here's something I want you to understand about life, and this is a very important thing for Christians to understand, is this. This world, this timeline we live in is going somewhere. The Christians believe that time is linear. It means it goes in one direction. It's not cyclical. There are worldviews that say, well, it's just a cycle, and it doesn't really matter what happens this life because you're going to come back next life, and who knows what that's going to be, and maybe you can make it all better next life. And no, God goes, this is the time I've given you to run. This is the time I've handed you the ball. Now go run with it, right? And He's going, listen, this is going somewhere. And as Christians, we have something to aim for. And the sooner we get to understand that this life matters, that this is the place that God put us, we can realize that we're running in the real world, not on a treadmill. And it gives us something to aim for with our lives. The Apostle Paul was relentless in this kind of living. He was relentless in his pursuit of what God had laid out for him to do. If you have your Bibles, open up to 2 Timothy chapter 4. And we're going to see 2 Timothy is called a pastoral epistle. And this is written to a younger pastor named Timothy. And so Paul is older in his life. He's actually, this is maybe the last book he wrote. I don't remember. But he's like getting on in age. He's getting to the place where he's about to get killed for his faith. And now instead of being the guy who's going around planting all the churches, he's being the guy going on the missionary journeys. He's in jail, and he's like writing letters and stuff like that. And he's handing off the ball to other people so they can start running with the ball, and they can start planting churches, they can start doing things. And this is what he says to a younger Christian when he says this: I charge you in the presence of God and of Christ Jesus, who is the judge of the living and the dead, by His appearing and in His kingdom, preach the word. Be ready in season and out of season. Reprove, rebuke, exhort, and in complete patience in teaching. For the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching. Having itching ears, they will accumulate for themselves teachers who will suit their own passions, and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander off into myths. As for you, always be sober-minded, endure the suffering, and do the work of evangelists, and fulfill your ministry. For I am already being poured out like a drink offering, meaning I'm already gone. I'm already on the way out the door. And the time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race, and I have kept the faith. I love that line. And my prayer is that when I get to the end of my life, I'll be able to say the same thing. I've fought the good fight. I've run the race, and I have kept the faith. That is the hope Christians have. That's of how we can live our part of the Christian life. What is our hope? That we will run the race that's set out before us. That we will do what God has put in our heart to do. And the thing that I think is the real question on how do we do this is that line that says, be ready in season and out of season. I think this is a killer in the Christian life, by the way. The thing that, you know what? It's just, I'm not feeling the whole Christian life thing right now. I'm not really feeling. Meg and I had a friend one time who was talking about getting a tattoo of a Bible verse on her arm, and we're like, okay, that's cool, whatever. And then later on, we were catching up and talking, and she was going through some hard things and was frustrated about this or that or whatever. And so we're like, we're sorry about that. Okay, that's kind of frustrating. I get it. And then we kind of conversation moves on and go, so did you ever get the tattoo? Like you were hoping to get the tattoo? And she goes, no, I'm not really feeling the whole Bible verse thing right now. We go, oh, okay. Yeah, maybe if you're not really feeling it, you don't want to permanently stamp something on your arm. Okay, I got it. But that's the thing. That happens, right? That happens. We get in these seasons of life where we go, oh, I'm just not really feeling it. I'm not really feeling the whole following Jesus thing right now. And something as silly as that, can be a real killer for our faith. I once heard an illustration that said, when you're riding a bicycle, the one time you can't rest, the one time you can't coast, is when you're going uphill. And so when we get in those seasons of life where it's just like, I'm not really feeling it, I don't, those are the times where you got to say, you know what, this is the season. I'm feeling it's out of season right now. But I'm going to stick to it because I can't get up this hill if I'm coasting. I got to keep going. And so Paul says this. The problem that people are going to have is they're going to have they're going to find seasons of life where they're just not really feeling it. And so the people will not endure the sound teaching. They're going to have itching ears, and they're going to accumulate teachers for themselves that will suit their own passions. They're going to find people who will tell them something that they're feeling. Oh, I'll tell you what you're feeling. I'll tell you what you want to hear. I'll tell you what you would like. And they will turn away from listening to the truth because they're feeling something else. And Paul's answer to that is, as for you, the rest of the world may be driven by their passions, but as for you, always stay sober-minded. Endure suffering, do the work of evangelists, and fulfill your ministry. Think, endure, fulfill. The biggest thing you can do when you're not really feeling it is to think your way through it. I'm reading through Numbers right now in my personal Bible time, and you're welcome for not doing a series through it. So I'm reading through, and there's that moment where Moses is the people are complaining the whole time. Everyone's upset. They're in the wilderness. There's no water. Everyone's annoyed. They're like, "Can we just go back to being slaves?" He's going, "No, we're not going to go back to being slaves." And then so God says, "All right, I'll give them water out of the rock. So take your staff, go talk to the rock, and when you talk to the rock, I'll put out water, and everybody can have water. It'll be good." And it's a story where instead of talking to the rock, Moses gets super frustrated and he just takes a stick and he hits the rock twice. He just swings at it, and then the water starts gurgling up. And everyone goes, "Oh, look, Moses hit the rock." And God said, and God was so furious with Moses. He's so prideful in that moment. Say, "It's all about me." And I love the way the NLT says it. He says this, "Because you did not trust me enough to demonstrate my holiness." I thought that was a fascinating line to find. The reason Moses got off board with God was because he didn't trust him enough to live into the holiness of God. He didn't trust him enough to, even though he's frustrated, even though he's mad, even though everyone's upset, even though everyone's blaming him for stuff, he didn't demonstrate the holiness of God because he lost his trust in the God that put him on mission. And Moses had a moment of not feeling it, got himself into a world of trouble. And by the way, something as simple as that event right there was the event that made it where Moses could not go into the promised land after 40 years. It's a fascinating thing. But if we can keep our wits about us, we can think through it and endure and fulfill the ministry and the goals and the vision God's put on our lives, maybe one day we will be like Nehemiah and say, "Oh God, remember me for the good." And like Paul will say, "I've fought the good fight, I've finished my race, and I've kept the faith." And when we end up on the shores of heaven, we will hear those words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." But we got to keep the faith. So that's the charge, okay? That's the charge. Let's get practical about it, okay? I read this book this last year that I really appreciated. I didn't expect to appreciate it so much, but I really did appreciate it. It's called Hero on a Mission by Donald Miller. And Donald Miller, about a decade and a half ago, kind of dove into sort of the nuts and bolts of storytelling, and it really kind of jogged some things in his head. And so everything he does now is based off the sort of the landscape of a story. What does it make to take a good story? And he kind of lays out the elements of a good story, and he looks at you and he says, "Now, why don't you go live a better story?" You know what I mean? Like, why don't you go do that? And so with this, he calls this a path to a meaningful life. And what Donald Miller says that every story has four kinds of characters. It has victims, villains, heroes, and guides. And he says this: we're all tempted to be either a victim or a villain in the story, right? Victims operate under the belief that they are helpless. They're just stuck. They're doomed to whatever fate may hand them. Life is just unfair. And villains come along, and instead of being, victims of the thing, they come around and they just make other people feel small. They take everything else on everybody else. And here's what Donald Miller says. He says this: our villainous tendencies may seem innocent enough, but villain energy is nothing to take lightly. When we begin to reduce others in our minds, we are dancing with the devil. When I have operated, this is Donald Miller talking, when I have operated out of villain energy, I became more and more isolated. And so he says, what you need to do is choose to take up the mantle of hero in your own story. And victims and villains, though they look different on the outside, they suffer the same fate, and that is that they do not transform. They do not change. They do not rise above their circumstances. They just sit there and there. And so what he says is, you need to make goals. The goal of your life is to you actually make the choices yourself. To be the hero who says, I know I'm not in charge of what's happened to me in my life, but I'm going to do what I can with them and make strides ahead. And he says, what we all need to understand is this term the social scientists came up with called agency. That you and I, just by being created in God's image, and by creating the human beings, we have a thing called agency. And agency is the ability to make your own choices. That's what agency is. It is to say, you are not stuck to whatever may be handed to you. You can make the best of it. And here's the deal. Wow, I lost where I am. And so, if you and I are going to just live our life going, you know what, whatever fate will give me, that's going to be my thing. At some point, you and I are going to get stuck in a spot where we go, you know what, fate's not a very good storyteller. And at least it's not a very fair storyteller, right? We all think of a celebrity and go, you know what, fate really wrote that person's story just right, but mine, he got kind of lazy, and it's just kind of boring. It says he lives in this house somewhere in Winston-Salem. That's right? Like, that's the story. And we need a better story. And so one of the things that Donald Miller says to kind of develop this idea of what are you aiming for with your life, how are you going to set these goals is, he says you should write a eulogy. Or as, Ben Stiller says in that movie, a you-googly, So what he says is once you start to focus in on what are the things you would like people to say about you at your funeral, you can then have something to aim for. And it then starts to put things into perspective. You go, oh, wow, that will take some change on my part to make that happen. I'll have to transform. I'll have to learn new skills to do that kind of stuff. I'll have to grow to become that kind of person. I'll have to do certain things to be the person that I want to be spoken about at my funeral. And so here's some questions to think about when you think about writing your own eulogy. What do you want to be true about you and your family when you die? What do you have? What do you have to be true? What do you want to have be true about your career and your accomplishments? What do you want your friends to be saying about you? And then we can ask the question: how do I have to live to get into that? And here's the thing: when you write your eulogy, it'll be embarrassing. You won't really want other people to hear it. You know why? Because the moment you read it back to yourself after writing it down, you'll go, I can't do that. Who am I to think I'm going to be doing that sort of stuff, or people are going to be saying that kind of thing about me? And you know what? That's a good thing. The goals we set for ourselves should be things that require us to grow if we're going to accomplish them. And then as we begin to live into that, and as we start taking up the mantle of hero in our lives, and we grow in our skills, and we grow in our ability, and we grow in our competence in life, and we can move through this life, what you'll find as you start getting older is that you stop being just the hero in your life. You start becoming this character called a guide. A person where younger people start showing up, going, hey, how do I do this? How do I get this? And you can start helping people learn to navigate their own stories because they see that you are doing it in your own life right now. And some people that trajectory is hard to figure out how to do. Like parents, for example, struggle mightily with knowing, when do I stop being the hero of the story and I turn into the guide of my kid's life, right? That's that sort of relay race baton handoff that is just super hard to figure out. Because your whole life is kind of centered around, there's this, I get married and I have a kid, and I have kids, and we're raising the kids, and my story involves raising these kids and teaching them how to live their lives and make their way into the world and that sort of stuff. And at some point, they're not just some person in your story, but they're supposed to be launched into the world to live their own story. And they're called by God to take up the mantle for their own life. And they're going to run off into the course that God has set before them. And knowing when and how to say, okay, I'm no longer just in charge of everything you do. I'm handing this off to you. That's a hard thing to figure out. In fact, a story a lot like that has been playing out in the public realm for a lot of people to kind of laugh at. But has anyone seen the videos of LeBron James and Stephen A. Smith arguing on the side of a basketball court? Does anybody remember that? Yes, we've seen this. So here's the long story. LeBron James has had an amazing career. He is old enough to have a full-grown adult child playing on the same basketball team as him. They've been on this court together, and he can still do like windmill dunks, and like 28-year-old kids are like scared to go up against him. It's an amazing thing. But when he was a rookie, or when he was very young in his career, he got into a fight with some Celtics on the sideline, and there's this whole big thing going on. And his mom got up and ran into the mix. And he got out of the sideline, and he looked at him, he saw his mom there. And he said, "Sit your behind down. I'm a man. You don't get to come swooping in and wrestling. This is my career. You don't get to come in here and say, I'm going to handle all this stuff that's going on. That's not the relationship anymore." And so she went and sat down. 20 years later, his son is a college graduate playing in the National Basketball Association, and the sports talk radio people are doing, sometimes you don't know if they're doing their job or if they're just making fun of people who are more athletic than they are, and the answer is they're doing both. And LeBron James walks over to one of the guys, he's giving his son a hard time. He says, "Keep my son's name out of your mouth," that whole whatever. I think, we all saw the Will Smith video, and he just took the words out of Will Smith. And he's doing the same thing his mom did for him. And so when it was his story, when it was his life, it was his career, he kind of knew, hey, this baton should have been handed off by now. But when it's him, he's the dad, and it's his son, you're going, well, it's hard. Parents struggle with this all the time. In your career, when's the right time to start handing things off? Say, hey, there are other people around me that could be learning these things. There's this time of trajectory that happens in all of our lives and all of our careers and all of our homes and all this everywhere, where certain amounts of handing things off and training others and helping others people learn what you know is a part of the trajectory, and it's hard to know how to navigate that. And sometimes people just never do. All we focus on is me and my job and my career and my trajectory, and I don't have to worry about anybody else. Jim Collins says that people should start doubling their influence with people half their age. If you have an influential relationship with a person in their 20s, you should find another person in their 20s. If you have two, do four. Just double that, because you're probably not being a guide for other people enough. It's hard to figure out. But I'll tell you something that's even worse for our society. It's not that the people are not making this progress in their lives, it's that a lot of people, particularly men, and especially men my age and younger, are not even figuring out what they want to be a hero about. A lot of people my age and younger are struggling mightily to even figure out what their lives should or could be about. And some research is telling us that they're not even looking. There's just this crisis of meaning in our world. And people aren't even knowing how to say, here's what I want, here's where I want to aim, here's where I'm going to spend my life working towards. And it's not a good thing. We were not created to just give up on life and go, you know what? It's hopeless. And instead of becoming the hero in their own story, they're choosing to live as either a victim or a villain for somebody else. And they're getting nowhere. The Apostle Paul, God calls us to not sit there, but to fulfill our vision, to fulfill your ministry, to run the good race. Figure out what you're supposed to be aiming for and chase after it. And I would suggest that you take some time. It took me about 4 weeks to come up with my eulogy. When I read this book, I sat down and thought, it was a hard thing to do. But I would suggest you take some time to write a eulogy for yourself and read it fairly often. I'll read you mine. How about that? And you can get your creative juices flowing. This is what I'm hoping will be said to me at my funeral, which is at least 5 years away. So I got time. I got time. Garrett was a loving husband to his wife, Megan, and a constant source of love, encouragement, and fun for his 4 kids, Sarah, Sam, Kenny, and Libby. He was known for his love of people and his sense of humor. He dedicated his ministry at Foothills Christian Church to preach Christ and connect people. Hundreds of people were baptized. Hundreds more found meaningful relationships in the halls of that church. Families grew stronger. Friendships were forged. Winston-Salem was served. And in everything, Garrett strived to make people think a second time about the goodness and the mercy and the splendor of God. A creative at heart, his imagination played itself out in many areas of his life, blah, blah, blah. You don't need to hear that part. Moving on. Through all of it, he never lost the joy of his family. The biggest surprise of his life was the gift of being husband and dad. He loved Megan very much, and with his kids, he always made it a point to go there with them. Whether it was visiting museums in the hearts of cities, playing sports, practicing routes on football fields, or body slamming his kids on the bed, he always tried to meet his kids where they were. He enjoyed most of all seeing them enjoy their lives and its new mercies every morning. He watched them grow up into strong, confident men and women of character who charted their own courses into their own new territories. Eventually, he and Megan bought some land outside of town where Megan could garden and he could write. They built a home with an open door and an open table where friends and family often came to visit. And at that table, you could always find a hot cup of coffee, friendship, and shelves of books. That's what I'm aiming for. That's the small slice of life I want to be true by the end of my life. And if I can get there, if I can have some of that, I would feel like God had been too good to me. God has set out something for you. He set out a course for me. And my hope for 2025 is that we'll figure out what it is. And we'll find our spot in God's story so that He could take us to places that we never thought possible before. So that at the end of our lives, we might look back and say, like Nehemiah, "Oh my God, remember me for good." And like Paul, we can say, "I have run my race. I have fought the good fight, and I have not given up on the faith." And if we can keep our heads about us, if we can live into the love of God, stay sober-minded in season and out of season, one day we will hear those words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." And because we have not given up, we will die with our boots on. And that will be a life well lived.